Welcome to Start with Hello, conversations about disability. In this episode, Ryan and I discuss all things volunteers. Specifically, how do you train and prepare volunteers for disability ministry? What tools and resources are available to make sure they are biblically grounded? How to prevent burnout, as well as Ryan's top picks for the free resources you should start with. So I wanted to start off this episode by kind of giving my own little experience into volunteering with disability ministry. And I certainly don't want to throw my church under the bus here because they're fantastic. They do a great job. But I wanted to point out just what we encounter. And I say Gary Spangler and I, and at our church, he was approached by the person who runs the disability ministry and said, we need help with a family. And they were having trouble keeping volunteers to work with this family. And it was a difficult, I think it was a difficult ask. There was two teenage boys, say boys, young men, 18 and 19 years old. Both were autistic. Both were nonverbal. One who I would say was increasingly more combative. And Gary was asked, not because of his vast experience in disability ministry, but I think he was asked mainly because of his size, because they needed a strong male volunteer. And I was told, not asked, I was told, hey, you're coming with me to help with this family on Saturday. And this whole episode here obviously is going to talk about volunteer one-on-one and the training, none of which I had. I had zero experience dealing with anything like this, and I was not brought in because of a great skill set or, wow, Jason just has such a heart. He has such a heart for the disability community. No, I was brought in just mainly because I was just a big guy, and that's what they needed at the time. And we learned a lot through that process, but we were in a room on the third floor of our church, pretty isolated, which is kind of ironic that we work with a population that's isolated in a church, and that room was isolated from everything else that were going. We were the only people on the floor at the time, and we were in a room that was not equipped for what we were doing. We had no real background information on the family, and I think a lot of times Gary and I walked in that room with like that butterfly, this pit in your stomach, like first day of school kind of thing. Like we just felt unprepared. And I can't imagine that would be unique. We would be unique in that situation, that other people have said, yeah, I want to help out. And then they get there and they feel unprepared. And again, I'm certainly not bashing the church at all. They're just trying to put resources with these families and allow them to come to church and be involved and included and loved. I totally get that. But as a volunteer, it was kind of nerve-wracking at times. And I know that every scenario is going to be different. Every single ministry is going to look different. Not everybody's going to be on the third floor by themselves. But one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, Ryan, is regardless of how the ministry looks, who is helping, who's in charge, there's got to be some better way to prepare volunteers. I just feel like that there has to be like something, some kind of groundwork you can lay before somebody walks into that room. And so my question is, how would you go about preparing a volunteer?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I kind of jump into some of those details, I'd just like to back up and maybe say there's probably a lot of different reasons why that happens. Like you said, it's not unique to you. It probably happens at more churches than it doesn't happen at. But I think there's probably two main reasons why volunteers maybe feel ill-equipped or don't get the training that they need. And I think the two reasons are this. First, the disability ministry leader at the church, whether it's a pastor, a director, a passionate parent, whomever it is, they're just too busy. And I think uh, training is one of those things that gets pushed to the side because people are just trying to fill holes, get rooms staffed with volunteers and, just keeping rooms open is sometimes just a really difficult situation for parents or for ministry leaders because they don't want to turn anyone away, and a lot of that I think has to do with busyness. I think the other reason why disability ministry leaders don't always do the training for volunteers that they need is maybe they themselves feel they feel ill-equipped. They don't feel like they have all the answers themselves. They're maybe afraid to get asked a question that they maybe don't know the answer to. So maybe training's avoided because of this feeling of not being able to come up with all the answers. So I think those are two reasons why sometimes ministries don't do the training that they need to do. But I think regardless, uh, it's something that's avoidable, that ministry leaders should do and absolutely have to do if they wanna have a good volunteer retention. They want volunteers to feel confident in what they're doing, and I think that's why I'm excited about a resource that we created called Volunteer 101. We recognize the fact that ministry leaders are busy. We recognize the fact that ministry leaders may not feel like they have all the answers, so they don't do the training. So we've created this resource uh, for ministry leaders to use. They can simply download it for free. They search for Volunteer 101 on Ability Ministry's website. They can take it and use it. It's a video training that has some downloadable pieces that will help them set up their own training day that they literally have almost no prep for, and I think it's exciting. I think back when I was doing local church ministry, if somebody shared this with me, even if it was a volunteer that says, "Hey, man, we got to do some training," and they shared this resource with me, I would be so excited to be able to have a resource like this. But kind of going back to your question, like what would I do in the situation? First of all, you've got to get to know your volunteers. You don't want to just plug someone in because they're a warm body. You want to go through a volunteer application process. So you want to get to know them, and all these resources that I'm mentioning here are available in the Volunteer 101 free download. So you want to have a volunteer application. You want to sit down in a meeting. You want to do the background check. You want to help them. So in your situation, get to know the family first before you get thrown into the room with the kids. Get to know the family. Get the information that you need to be successful. Whether that's having the parent fill out an information sheet on the child. So all these different pieces of information help volunteers feel equipped and give them some confidence that they can be successful. So yeah, I would just say if you're at a church, you're too busy, you feel like you're too busy, you feel like you don't have the answers, download our free Volunteer 101 resource. It will be a huge help to you. It is full of other free resources that you can use in your ministry to make your volunteers feel confident that they can be successful.
And I think you mentioned this word several times, but I kinda wanna reiterate this. What does the volunteer one-on-one resource cost?
0.
0. So, there's kinda no excuse
Right, right, yes.
other
Cost
than
you
just having the
0.
time to implement it, right? So, as you were talking about this, I was thinking also about it's okay, great. You've got the forms, you've got to know the volunteers a little better. There's been times where we've had a student come into our class, our teen class at church, and maybe it was a rough Sunday. And so I'll say, "Hey, can I come in a little early and look at the information sheet? I want to know a little bit more about this person. What's going on? Is there anything that I can do or not do at church to make their experience, better?" But I was thinking about ongoing training because it's one thing to say, "Hey, here's this," and then just hope that from now on they are just the best volunteer ever. And it kind of hit me the other day as well. I was going through a training. They call it a refresher, but this took a long time, and it's a organization called Safe Sport, and it's something that'll apply to our Rise Fitness program. And it's a lot of To me, it's a lot of common sense. It's basically the sport version of Ministry Safe. And in a way, it's kind of sad that some of this stuff even has to be explained. Like if we're going to an event with Rise, I'm not going to travel with one of our athletes by myself. I'm not going to do something by myself with them. So, but that training is required every year in order to keep my certification. I know our church does Ministry Safe, um, but I don't see a lot of continuing effort to say, it's not like you have to you got to have 20 hours of volunteer disability ministry training in order to keep your status. It's like we need we just need people, right? So, if you've got a volunteer who's been helping out maybe every other Sunday with a class, they're going to gain some experience. But what do you think ministries could do to help those volunteers out even more?
Yeah, again, I would say one of the obstacles is time and is doing an ongoing training, having people come to the church for a training. So I'd say let's overcome all those obstacles. Let's find some free resources online and share them with volunteers. I think that's the best thing that a ministry leader can do is say, okay, here is a great video training that I can share with my volunteers. I can simply email it out and I can say, hey, everybody, take a chance this week. Whether it's 15 minutes, half an hour, whatever, watch this video. And I think that's a great way to do it because again, people are so strapped for time coming to the church for one more meeting, one more training. It's maybe something that volunteers desire, but again, there's this struggle of making it work time wise. So find a good free training video online and share it with people. And Jason, just let me mention the fact that we have lots of those on our website at abilityministry.com. You go to our homepage, there's a resources tab, click on the resources tab, and you can then click on the videos and go straight to training videos. We have a ton of free training videos on our website that any ministry leader can browse through, find one that maybe will address an issue that's going on in their ministry, and they can share that out to their ministry leaders just by sending an email. And I think that's probably one of the best ways to do that. And one of the things that I always tell people when I'm working with them doing consultations or trainings is if you don't find what you need on our website, tell us. And then we'll make a note of that and we'll create a training video for you. Because again, if your ministry needs it, chances are other ministries need it too, and we want to be kind of that go-to resource for churches. So yeah, check out abilityministry.com and go to our training videos. See what uh, if you find what you need, use it. If you don't find what you need, let us know. We'll create it for you. I think it's a great way to help volunteers in an ongoing fashion.
I'm curious, what percentage of the training videos and resources that we have been created because I found myself in a sticky spot and I called you for help? Do you have any guess as to what percentage it is?
Oh man, there's definitely a percentage. I don't wanna say it's like a majority, but I think it makes the point though, if you don't find what you need, we can create that for you, and, we can help you out and give you some of those helps, that are desperately needed. But yeah, I'm just as we're talking, I'm scrolling through the training videos page, and I think we've got I think somewhere over 60 training videos, somewhere around there. So chances are you're probably going to find what you need to do some ongoing training with your volunteers if you just kind of browse through our website.
Yeah, and those things would also be great. Like if you can't get everybody together to the building for whatever reason, you could do this on Zoom or Facebook Live. You can, play one of these videos and talk about it with your team. You could do that once a month. That would be helpful. But I'm really glad you mentioned the whole thing about if you don't see something, maybe you've encountered something and you don't see it to let us know because I know specifically, I think it was the fun time fillers resource where I hadn't been teaching class that long. In fact, I was so new at teaching, I was even hesitant to say I was the teacher. I think I was still like facilitator or whatever because I just was so uncomfortable saying that I was the teacher. But I remember looking up and I looked up at the clock. We had watched the video, we had answered questions, we'd done prayer requests, and I think we still had like 20 or 30 minutes left. And I had that cold sweat break out and I had no idea what to do. And everybody's just staring at me, because I'm supposed to have the plan. And so, like, that time fillers resource was a great example of that. And we've seen other people download it and we've used that so much. So there's a lot of great resources that, and I think that they're just practical. We weren't like, well, let's just create this just because we feel like creating it. It was always to meet a need of somebody in the classroom, whether a teacher or a volunteer. But I feel like I already know the answer to this, but I'm still going to toss this out there because I think when I first heard this, I was surprised that people would say this or much less think it. And it goes to the heart of how do we prepare volunteers to be biblically sound. But I'm wondering, have you ever encountered anyone at church who felt like they didn't really need a disability ministry because God's just going to give a free pass to anybody who has a disability? So why even have this? Have you ever run across anything like that?
Yes, unfortunately, and that's one of those situations where it's hard for me to keep my cool sometimes. So not only have I run into it like in a church situation, but I've also run into it at a very very large Christian conference. I'm not going to say the name of the conference, but we were exhibiting at a conference once, and a senior pastor of a church walked up to us, and it was one of those situations where he was like trying to pat us on the back for doing disability ministry. So he's complimenting us. And he said, "Hey, I just want to commend you for what you do." He said, "But I don't understand why you do it." And I'm like, that very question was like had my it had my attention. I'm like, "What do you mean you don't understand why we do it?" And he said almost exactly those words. He said, "Well," and I'm not gonna say the word that he used to refer to, people with disabilities, but he said, "Those people, um, they get a free pass to heaven, because they are," uh, and again, I'm gonna use the word, it was kinda that idea that, they can't understand the gospel, so God just lets them in for free, so, like, why do you waste your time,
Please tell me this guy did
doing
not.
disabilities?
Please tell me this guy did not use the R word.
I think so. I think again, this is like almost 7 years ago, at a very large Christian conference,
But still,
and
that's kind of a word that you would expect to hear like maybe 20 or 30 years ago, but 7 years
right,
ago from it's
yeah.
like I thought that our inclusive language had progressed a little bit. But anyway,
Well, and, older dude, I'm not making any excuses for him, but, like, when he said that, I was so confused, I was like a deer in the headlights, like, I didn't almost didn't even know how to respond, like, because, here's this, like, senior leader, older guy that you're expecting to have some wisdom to share, and I think that was one of those reasons why we created a resource that simply says, "What does the Bible say about disability?" It's a one-page document. You can again find it on our website under the one-page documents that are free resource, and you can print that off and share that with your volunteers. Not only share it with your volunteers, share it with other ministry leaders, because I think we take for granted the fact that we think that all, pastors, ministry directors, they know everything about the Bible. We take that for granted, and we just assume that they would know what kind of the Bible says about disability, what the theology of disability is. Um, but I think that's a wrong assumption. We take that for granted and think people know, but they don't. So download this resource. What does the Bible say about disability? Breaks it up kind of into four different categories. Gives you a handful of scriptures um, for each of the kind of categories that we've kind of tried to simplify things. It's by no means an exhaustive list, but we feel like it's some of the best. scriptures about disability and does address the fact that there are no free passes to heaven, including for people with intellectual developmental disabilities. And if I had that document, man, I just said, "Hey, man, take a look at this. Come back and talk to me after you take a look at this." Yeah, I think that's having a firm foundation built on the truth is something that ministries and volunteers really, really need to start with. It's not something that you wait to do, after 6 months of volunteering, say, hey, let's figure out what the Bible says about this. Start with that. Make sure everybody's on the same page. Make sure you're coming at this from the right angle. Most people get into disability ministry because they know it's right, feels right. But most people don't know what the Bible actually says about disability. So when you add the truth to that kind of feeling that you've got, like, I know I should do this because it's right, it feels right. But when you add truth to that, I think that gives you a firm foundation to be successful in volunteering in disability ministry.
I love what you said about making other ministry leaders aware of that, people outside of your disability ministry, because I think a lot of, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think a lot of this comes down to general lack of knowledge or awareness. And I might be really excellent at one ministry, and I have just a really broad understanding of something else. Like if you're asking me about a specific software that I'm using, and I've been using it for years, of course I'm going to have a lot of answers for it. Something brand new that came out that's been added to our arsenal, okay, I may not know as much, just maybe what I've seen in headlines or something. And I kind of wonder maybe if some of these other ministries are like that. Maybe they understand, okay, yeah, we have this, but do they really understand why? And I think that's not a bad thing to download this, which is free, and give it to the staff. Every single person can benefit from this. I know some of the elders and deacons at our church, there was some of the training that they go through. There's like a quick resource guide that was updated with some to correct some bad information. I say bad, wasn't bad. It just wasn't built on the foundation correctly, is probably the way I should say it. But that was corrected and given so that somebody who really has no familiarity at all with disability ministry could at least speak about it in the right way. But I could go on and list like every single one of our one-page guides. And I know you mentioned that you were just scrolling through it. There's a metric ton of them. And one of my favorite things is when we get the notification email and you see that somebody has downloaded one of these resources, and then you scroll that email, and I'm scrolling and scrolling. I'm like, this is awesome. This person got one of every single free thing we offer. I love seeing those emails. Um, I think they're all valuable, but when it comes to preparing volunteers specifically, are there any of these that stand out? I mean, obviously, you could download every single one of them and might feel overwhelmed. Like, great, I've got 40 PDFs and 20 training videos now that I've got to sift through. So, outside of the Volunteer 101, which is a great place to start, are there any others that stand out as like, okay, get Volunteer 101? However, once you're done with that, I'd also recommend some of these. Like, what do those stand out for you?
Yeah, we just mentioned what does the Bible say about disability? Starting with that firm foundation on the truth, I think is a must have for a new volunteer. And then I would say there are probably 2 or 3 more that I would say are kind of the must-have from the starting blocks. One of those is called the wrong assumptions about disability. Again, we want people to come in, and we want to dispel all of those wrong assumptions that are out there about disability because there are so many of them. I think this resource addresses, like, 30 different wrong assumptions about disability because we want people coming in on the same page, agreeing on the truth and making sure we're coming at this from the right angle. Another one I would highly recommend would be a resource that we created on disability etiquette. So assumptions address, truth and lies, obviously about disability. Disability etiquette teaches you what to say, what not to say, what to do, what not to do, because you don't want to be offensive. So there, because there's so many different things that we um, have been a part of our language, have been a part of just what we say for ages. We don't even think about the fact that they could be offensive to somebody with a disability. And then another one that some ministries may be apprehensive to share with a new volunteer is a resource that we created that's called "It's Okay to Say No." And again, this seems counterintuitive because you want volunteers to jump in, be excited, and do everything you can possibly ask them to do. But one of the things that happens is uh, sometimes volunteers do too much, they burn out, they leave, and we don't want that to happen. So we want people to know that it's okay to say no, even to some volunteering opportunities. So that's a great resource. Again, they're all free one-page documents that we've created that you can find in our store. So I'd recommend probably those three plus. What does the Bible say about disability?
So we're allowed to say no to requests from
Yes, yes, you are allowed to say no. You are allowed to say no. You
say
need to
no
know. You need
frequently and often and very loudly. Just kidding.
no, no. But you need to know your limits. You need to stay in a healthy place yourself so you can be successful as a volunteer. Because if you're stretched too thin or you're put in a situation you don't feel comfortable in, you're not going to be successful, and it's not good for you. It's not good for the people you're volunteering with.
Yeah, and it's important to balance this with everything else in your life that's going on. Speaking from personal experience, and I'm sure you've encountered this recently as well, is that it's hard to serve when you're carrying a lot of weight for other burdens, in your life. So it's not like you're not helping. I think it's a really important thing. My daughter's figured this out. She was signing up for every single thing. And this is great because it's a great segue into the next question that I had for you is that I've seen this where people find disability ministry and they're like, wait a minute, this thing's been here all along. Like, I love this. Like, I never saw myself fitting in with this, but now that I'm here, I can't imagine not doing it. Like, this is the perfect place for me to serve. And they're gung ho and they sign up for every single thing that the church does. And I'm sure the staff is like, this is great. We've got another, gung ho volunteer that's going to be available. And if they're not balancing some of those things out, my daughter realized at some point that instead of being there every single Sunday, she would do every other Sunday. And that would allow her to go to church and worship and get that connection that she needed and not solely, like that phrase, get lost in service. But you recently wrote an article that was titled Curse of a Great Volunteer. And I think that kind of is a great segue into that. So, can you walk us through a little bit of the basics of what that article means?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the idea is you have as a ministry leader a pool of volunteers, and you can easily kind of think in your mind, you know, if I've got 20 volunteers, I know that there are two, three, four that are like my absolute best volunteers. I can trust them in any situation. If I need to call somebody last minute because somebody didn't show up, I know they're going to jump in. They're not going to ask any questions, and they're just kind of like the your best volunteers. But what happens is in ministry, uh, situations happen. Like I said, people don't show up. You start a new ministry. You add an additional service to what you're doing in your disability ministry. And what happens to your volunteer pool is your volunteer pool becomes smaller and becomes more stretched. And ministry leaders often lean on those top, three, four, their best volunteers to do everything. And as your pool gets stretched thin, so do the volunteers that are doing everything. One of the things that we have found is that people love disability ministry because it is the greatest ministry. possible, and people want to do everything, but there's a limit to how much you can do. It might end up being like a great volunteer says, "Okay, I'm serving at the 9 o'clock service, and then I'm going to church at the 11 o'clock service." Then you launch the 11 o'clock disability ministry. You need people to fill in the spots, and the ministry leader says, "Hey, can you do this for a couple of weeks?" And those couple of weeks turn into a couple of months. And this great volunteer is too nice to ever say anything, but they're dying inside because they haven't gone to church in months, but they're doing what they love. And it becomes a situation where a great volunteer can become overused and overlooked. And what happens is oftentimes these volunteers are too nice to say anything. So, um, what happens sorry, what happens is, they just don't show up one day. They disappear because they don't wanna say something, um, that would hurt their ministry leader. So, they burn out and they disappear, and that's something we don't want to happen. Again, that's why we created the resource we mentioned a few minutes ago called "It's Okay to Say No," because you need to stay healthy and keep your life balanced, spiritually, mentally, physically, kind of all that. You can't do that if you're serving every single hour, every single outing, every single event. You've got to take time to fill yourself up. That concept is you can only pour out what's being poured into you. So you got to take care of yourself, and you don't want to be taken advantage of. And again, I don't think it's something that ministry leaders do because they're mean, terrible people. I just think that they are stretched thin, so they lean on their best volunteers, uh, sometimes to their detriment.
And I think what Lauren found was that when she did go from being at every single thing possible to volunteering every other week, she shared with me that she had kind of started to dip into that burnout phase. And it felt some days like a little bit of a chore to be there. Of course, she was volunteering in disability ministry and would leave there and then go volunteer in the nursery. And that can be difficult to do every single Sunday. And what she found was that once she took a little bit of time to go to church and to connect with her friends and to really worship and to be involved in the service, that she told me, she's like, wow, I was like genuinely excited to go back and serve. And she found out that she missed everybody. And so that was an important thing. I think it makes you a better, definitely makes you a better volunteer, to miss the people. And I understand wanting to be there all the time. I hate it when I can't see my friends all the time. It stinks, but it's like a race. You gotta pace yourself. And that kind of leads into, I don't know if that would be considered necessarily a sensitive topic. I guess for some people it is, wanting to take time off, and how do I do that? I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But you also wrote another article for the website not too long ago, and I think for a lot of people this would be a sensitive topic, but it's one that every ministry is going to encounter at some point if they're in ministry long enough. Unfortunately, this was something that happened to me where I had to use this resource. And you wrote about what happens when a staff member or a volunteer might suspect abuse or neglect. And I think that's another thing that volunteers might not necessarily be ready to have happen to them in church. They might think, well, I'm here on Sunday, everybody's going to be in a great mood, we're going to do our lesson, and we're going to go home. And but then you might suspect abuse or neglect, or somebody comes right out and says something that kind of knocks you out of your chair. So walk us through like the basic premise of that and the free resource that came about as a result.
Yeah, this was again the heartbreaking side of ministry. That it, like you said, it's unavoidable. It's going to happen. It's a matter of when, not if. A child or a young adult or an adult comes in, they got a suspicious bruise, they've got a behavior that kinda doesn't line up with what you'd expect. They've got a stain on their clothing, or they're wearing the same clothing every single week, or they just seem to be, the kid that can't get enough of the snack. Anytime something feels off as a volunteer, always, always, always trust your gut on it. Um, as a volunteer, um, find a ministry leader that say, "Hey, something seems off here." Make sure you document everything. The important thing is when you suspect abuse or neglect, you treat it like hot potato. You don't want to be the last person holding that information. You always want to report up, so you're not grabbing your other volunteers and saying, "Hey, what do you think about this? Let's take a poll of the entire room." You report up. So it's to your room leader. Your room leader reports up to the ministry leader. The ministry leader reports up to their direct report on staff. And again, you don't want to be the last person holding the info, but you have to report it. You are a mandated reporter when you suspect neglect or abuse. And it's, that those are the phone calls that ministry leaders hate to do, whether it's child protective services or it's a hotline for adults, with the county board of developmental disability. Um, those are sometimes some of the most important phone calls that you could make because it could be the phone call, that saves a life or stops abuse, or addresses neglect that's happening. Yeah, it's something that I encountered way more than I wanted to in ministry, and there wasn't a great system for it when I was in ministry, so we created a resource for it, and we've kind of recreated it at Ability Ministry to share with churches. So what we've got a video training. We've got an information sheet for volunteers that they can kind of go through the steps of, okay, here's something I suspect. What should I do next? And then we've got a customizable sheet that churches can take and download, and it literally helps you document what you see or what you suspect. Because you got to have the documentation because when you make the phone call as the ministry leader, they're going to ask for all different kinds of pertinent information. So this customizable documentation sheet that we've created is super helpful for ministry leaders because they can just plug in the information as they ask the questions, and as they kind of prepare to make for that phone call. So it's heartbreaking, it's terrible, but we're mandated reporters. We've got to do our part, and this is a great resource on a really uncomfortable conversation topic that is needed in every single ministry.
And I think in some ways you can tie this back to what the Bible says about disability in a way, because I could easily see somebody hearing something or seeing something and writing that off as, well, they're autistic. They don't really understand what was happening. Or for whatever reason, they've misunderstood what was going on. And I don't think that that's our job to determine that. And that had come up to me. We had an individual where some things were said to myself and another volunteer. And I thought, that is not right. And I was not going to I was not going to turn myself into an investigator, right? I'm not going to say, okay, well, let's sit down and I'm going to really find out if you really understand or if this is really the truth. Because, like you said, I don't, these people are too important at the end of the day. And I just could not let that go. And that was something that I thought, you know what? W- What's the worst that could happen? Somebody finds out, oh, okay, this is what's going on. It was a misunderstanding. Um, I would rather have that than to ignore it. And so we followed this example and, like you said, reported it up. And I think it goes back to like all of these tools that we've talked about today. So we've talked about like the volunteer 101. We've provided an introduction to a new volunteer. We've given a biblical foundation, what the Bible says about disability, and our ongoing training videos and our resources, these one-page guides. and articles like how it's okay to say no and what to do when you encounter abuse or neglect. I think all of these things are so helpful because these rules and these guidelines really allow the volunteer to be a great volunteer and to remove any of this guesswork. Like, I don't like, if I was in charge of a ministry, I don't want them to think about, well, what do I do? Well, you know exactly what to do. Here it is. So it just eliminates that, and it just gives, I think for me, having a lot of this knowledge now, I'm way more confident in a lot of these situations. And I feel like you can drop me in any kind of situation and I might not know all the answers. And chances are I will not know all of the answers. And chances are I will call Ryan afterwards and say, hey, I've got some ideas from some resources that we need because I messed something up. But I would feel a lot more confident just knowing that I could operate in that situation because I have rules, I have guidelines, I've got a little bit more training. I have people that I could go to for some of these answers. So, thanks for hopping on and talking about how to better prepare volunteers for disability ministry. It's a really, like you said, it's the best ministry. We may be biased, but it's a great ministry, and we want everybody to be confident and prepared and comfortable and to know how to handle things. And for those of you that are tuning in, to make it easier on you to find all these resources, because there are a lot of them. We're going to prepare a blog post. We're going to link to this episode and all of these resources that we mentioned. We're going to put them in a single spot. And if you ever get lost, you can just go to abilityministry.com and go to the store and click on free stuff or one page guides, and you can find every single thing there. But we'll link all of that stuff in an article just to give you a single location to go find this. And in the meantime, hit subscribe on whatever platform you're tuning in. Of course, we'd love for you to drop us a review, shoot us an email if there's a resource or training video or discussion you would like to hear us have, any way that we could help your disability ministry reach your disability community for Christ. Until next time.
1 in 5 people in the world live with a disability, so it shouldn't be difficult to find lots of images to represent this. However, that's not always the case. Disability is Beautiful provides an exhaustive library of art provided by and for the disability community. Our photos reflect the beauty, diversity, and strength of the disability community. Whether you're a business owner, a content creator, or an advocate, Disability is Beautiful has photos for use in blogs, websites, social media, printed materials, business, nonprofit, or personal projects. Visit disabilityisbeautiful.com to create your free account and help us change the face of stock photography.